The envelope is
The
sealed.
envelope is sealed.
And the road ahead is
already falling behind the clock.
I know the bridges,
but I do not know which ones still stand.
The
The envelope is sealed. And the road ahead is already falling behind the clock. I know the bridges, but I do not know which ones still stand.
In the final years of the Second World War, countless warnings crossed occupied Europe in secret. Some traveled through coded radio signals. Others moved inside diplomatic pouches or military dispatches. A few depended on ordinary civilians carrying handwritten notes through roads watched by patrols, checkpoints, and aircraft. Most disappeared without record. One such warning, entrusted to a volunteer with no uniform and little authority, survived only in scattered recollections of local wartime administration. It described a danger that commanders needed to know immediately. The volunteer completed the journey against remarkable odds, but when the message finally reached its destination, the events it described had already unfolded the previous day. By the autumn of 1944, Allied armies had crossed into parts of Western Europe, yet large regions remained unstable. Roads were damaged, railway lines repeatedly bombed, and telephone cables were frequently cut by retreating German forces or destroyed during fighting. Military headquarters depended on layered communications that included wireless operators, dispatch riders, railway staff, local officials, and civilians willing to carry information through dangerous territory when every conventional system failed. In northern France, liberated towns often found themselves balancing celebration with uncertainty. Front lines shifted rapidly. Bridges that had survived 1 week disappeared the next. Fuel remained scarce, maps quickly became outdated, and military units moved faster than administrative services could keep pace. Civilian volunteers became an unexpected part of maintaining order. They guided supply convoys through unfamiliar villages, translated local information for Allied officers, recorded damaged infrastructure, and occasionally carried urgent correspondence when radios were unavailable or insecure. Among those volunteers was Marcel Fournier, a 42-year-old municipal clerk from a small town near Amiens. Before the war, his work rarely extended beyond property records, tax registers, and road maintenance reports. Years of occupation transformed those ordinary responsibilities into something far more demanding. Municipal offices collected information about damaged bridges, displaced families, missing livestock, unexploded shells, and shortages of food. Every detail could influence military planning after liberation. Marcel was not a member of the armed forces. He carried no weapon. His greatest strengths were familiarity with local roads and a reputation for reliability among neighboring communities. Throughout the occupation, he had quietly maintained records despite repeated disruptions, preserving documents that later helped restore civil administration. After Allied forces advanced through the region, officers discovered that local clerks like Marcel often possessed more current knowledge than recently printed military maps. Late in October, engineers repairing a railway crossing received reports from villagers living farther east. Several described unusual German activity during the previous evening. Heavy trucks had moved along secondary roads after dark instead of using the main highway. Farm workers reported hearing tracked vehicles concealed beneath woodland cover. One railway employee claimed he had observed bridge demolition charges being repositioned rather than removed. Individually, none of these reports seemed extraordinary. German units retreating across northern France frequently shifted equipment during darkness to avoid Allied aircraft. Yet when Marcel assembled the statements while updating municipal records, a pattern emerged. Every observation pointed toward a narrow river crossing that Allied supply columns intended to use within 48 hours. The bridge itself had escaped destruction because German engineers apparently lacked sufficient explosives during their withdrawal several weeks earlier. Since then, Allied engineers had reinforced the structure and reopened it for military traffic. Daily convoys now crossed carrying ammunition, medical supplies, fuel, and replacement vehicles toward formations advancing farther east. If the reports proved accurate, German troops had either returned to prepare the bridge for demolition or intended to establish an ambush along the surrounding approaches. Military authorities needed confirmation immediately. The local Allied liaison office attempted to contact divisional headquarters by telephone. The line remained dead. Wireless operators struggled with equipment that had developed faults after recent storms. A motorcycle dispatch rider departed before dawn but returned within an hour after discovering that shell craters and collapsed culverts blocked the direct route. Alternative roads remained open only to bicycles, carts, or pedestrians. Marcel volunteered without hesitation. He received a sealed envelope summarizing the civilian reports alongside sketches marking the suspected locations of enemy activity. An officer explained only that headquarters needed the information before the following morning's convoy movements. If conditions changed, thousands of gallons of fuel and hundreds of vehicles might need rerouting. The journey covered little more than 50 kilometers in ordinary circumstances. Under wartime conditions, it became considerably longer. Marcel borrowed a sturdy bicycle whose tires had already been patched several times. He carried identification papers issued by the provisional French authorities together with Allied travel permits recognizing his administrative duties. His instructions were straightforward. Avoid unnecessary delays. Deliver the envelope unopened. Return only if impossible to proceed. Rain began shortly after sunrise. Road surfaces softened into heavy mud where military traffic had already churned the ground. Sections of pavement disappeared beneath damaged drainage ditches. Twice Marcel lifted the bicycle over fallen trees that had not yet been cleared. The first checkpoint delayed him only briefly. British military police examined his documents carefully before allowing him onward. They warned him that scattered German patrols had recently been reported beyond the next village, although organized resistance appeared unlikely. By midday, he encountered the first major obstacle. A temporary timber bridge erected across a canal had partially collapsed beneath the weight of engineering vehicles earlier that morning. Repair crews estimated several hours before reopening. Waiting was impossible. Local residents directed Marcel toward a narrow footbridge almost 3 kilometers away. The detour consumed precious time, forcing him across flooded fields where the bicycle repeatedly became trapped in mud. As afternoon approached, Allied aircraft passed overhead toward the east. Their presence reassured many travelers, but also meant roads occasionally closed while convoys halted to reduce congestion. Marcel spent nearly 40 minutes beside a hedgerow as columns of trucks moved west carrying wounded soldiers and damaged equipment. Drivers exchanged only brief words. Everyone appeared to be moving according to schedules already under pressure. Shortly afterward, Marcel met an American engineering officer studying a damaged crossroads. The officer recognized the urgency suggested by the sealed dispatch but admitted he possessed no radio capable of reaching the intended headquarters. His own communications truck remained stranded several kilometers behind because of axle damage. He pointed Marcel toward another secondary road. "It is slower," he reportedly remarked through an interpreter, "but at least it still exists." Evening approached before Marcel reached the outskirts of the designated headquarters. Unexpectedly, the command post had already relocated. Staff officers had shifted several kilometers east during the afternoon to remain closer to advancing formations. Signposts intended to guide couriers had not yet been erected. A local transport unit finally directed Marcel toward the new location after searching through movement orders. Darkness had fallen when he arrived. The envelope passed immediately into the hands of an intelligence officer, who opened it alongside operational maps spread across a wooden table inside a requisitioned farmhouse. Silence followed as the reports were compared with information already received. The officer thanked Marcel for completing the journey but quietly informed him that the warning described events that had occurred the previous day. The morning convoy had crossed the bridge according to schedule before reconnaissance aircraft detected concealed German positions nearby. Engineers attempting routine inspections encountered explosive charges hidden beneath structural supports together with machine gun positions covering both approaches. The resulting engagement remained relatively brief but costly. German demolition teams succeeded in damaging part of the bridge before withdrawing under artillery fire. Several Allied engineering vehicles were destroyed. Casualties occurred among bridge repair crews rather than the supply convoy itself because commanders had halted traffic once firing began. Emergency bridging equipment restored limited crossings within hours, but planned operations experienced significant delays. Marcel's information matched almost every detail uncovered after the fighting. Had headquarters received the civilian reports 24 hours earlier, reconnaissance patrols might have examined the crossing before engineers entered the area. Demolition charges could potentially have been discovered under less dangerous circumstances. No officer claimed certainty. War rarely allowed such confidence. Instead, the report became another example demonstrating how fragmented communications complicated even successful advances across liberated territory. The intelligence staff questioned Marcel throughout the evening. They requested exact names of villagers, railway workers, and maintenance crews responsible for each observation. None had witnessed the entire picture independently. Only when their separate accounts reached Marcel's municipal office did the pattern emerge. Analysts noted this carefully. Ordinary administrative records had revealed operational significance overlooked because information remained scattered among civilian sources. Within days, revised procedures encouraged liaison officers to collect local observations more systematically whenever military units entered newly liberated districts. Municipal clerks received standardized reporting forms translated into French. Civil administrators gained clearer channels for forwarding urgent information through military liaison offices rather than relying solely upon improvised couriers. The changes did not eliminate delays. Damaged infrastructure continued interrupting communications across Europe until the war ended. Nevertheless, officers increasingly recognized that civilian observations deserved prompt evaluation, particularly regarding bridges, roads, railway lines, and unexploded demolitions. Marcel returned home after only a few hours' rest. His bicycle journey back proved less dramatic, though equally exhausting. Municipal responsibilities awaited him. Registers required updating. Families sought confirmation regarding missing relatives. Engineers requested maps identifying wells, culverts, and abandoned quarries. The war continued demanding ordinary administrative work that rarely appeared in official histories. Weeks later, Allied representatives visited the town to acknowledge assistance provided by local volunteers during recent operations. The gathering remained modest. No large ceremony accompanied the occasion. Certificates expressing appreciation were distributed to municipal employees, railway workers, interpreters, medical volunteers, and road maintenance crews. Marcel accepted his certificate quietly before returning to his office. Neighbors later remembered him mentioning only that communications during wartime often failed through no individual's fault. Roads vanished. Radios malfunctioned. Headquarters relocated. Every delay accumulated until urgent information became historical record instead of practical warning. His observation reflected experiences shared across occupied Europe. Military archives preserve countless operational reports describing successful offensives, destroyed bridges, captured positions, and logistical achievements. Far fewer documents describe the uncertain journeys undertaken by civilians carrying handwritten messages between isolated headquarters. Their work existed within the narrow space separating military necessity from ordinary daily life. Historians examining Allied advances after the war frequently emphasized fuel shortages, engineering challenges, damaged transport networks, and rapidly changing front lines. Less attention fell upon local administrative workers who quietly connected military organizations with civilian knowledge. Their contributions rarely altered campaigns dramatically, yet they often reduced confusion, identified hazards, and accelerated recovery in territories emerging from occupation. The bridge near Amiens eventually reopened permanently after additional engineering work strengthened its foundations. Traffic flowed across it for decades, long after military vehicles disappeared from its approaches. Travelers crossing the river rarely considered how close wartime demolitions had come to destroying the structure entirely. Municipal records survived as well. Among property files and maintenance reports remained brief references to unusual vehicle movements observed during October 1944, handwritten witness statements collected from railway employees, and correspondence acknowledging receipt of information by Allied authorities. The documents lacked dramatic language. They contained measurements, dates, road names, and signatures rather than heroic descriptions. Together they revealed how ordinary observations acquired importance only when someone recognized their connection. Marcel Fournier never regarded himself as a hero. He had simply accepted responsibility because available alternatives had failed. His bicycle, worn shoes, and sealed envelope represented tools no different from the ledgers and ink pens he used before and after the conflict. The warning reached its destination one day too late, not because of negligence or indifference, but because war had broken the systems designed to move information quickly. Damaged bridges delayed travelers. Failed telephones silenced offices. Headquarters shifted faster than maps could be updated. Every interruption stole minutes until those minutes became an entire day. The volunteers who carried messages through that uncertainty seldom appeared in campaign histories, Yet they formed an overlooked network linking civilians and soldiers across landscapes where ordinary communication no longer existed. Their efforts rarely guaranteed success, and sometimes they arrived after events had already run their course. Even then, the information they delivered helped commanders understand what had happened, refine future procedures, and recognize that careful attention to local voices could prevent similar dangers from being overlooked again. In the quiet records left behind after liberation, Marcel's journey remains less a story of failure than one of persistence. The message arrived too late to change the outcome at a single bridge, but not too late to remind those rebuilding wartime communications that valuable intelligence often began with ordinary people who noticed small details, trusted their judgment, and refused to let important information remain unwritten or undelivered.